you want to?
Oh, hi guys, welcome to AIAS's professional portfolio. Ash here is going to kind of tell us like what is a portfolio and what's the best way to go around it, and like how you can kind of throw one together, especially for interview day that's coming up. So this is really exciting, and this is Ash, and he's going to be our here's our presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Ash Lettow. I'm a studio director at Workshop Architects here in Milwaukee, but I'm also an adjunct professor here at UW-Milwaukee. And so this is to give you a few, just to show you a bunch of images of portfolios that I feel are successful, but also too just to give you a general lay of the land on how to put one of these together. I do teach a portfolio class here at the school, every semester, so sometimes that can also for a longer process of assembling one of these things. And I know interview day is coming up. It is next week, so we'll talk a little bit about that as well. It is an informal session, so if you have questions as I'm talking, please feel free to raise your hand, and it is an informal dialogue. Portfolios ostensibly speak for you when you're not there. They have to stand on their own. You can't just expect somebody, you know the project very well, you're this close to it. You know all the moves you made, you all know the decisions you made. I myself, who does review the portfolios for workshop, does not. So you can't expect me to read your mind. As architects, we're visual people. Drawings need to speak for themselves, renderings need to speak for themselves, and they have to stand on their own. And so the portfolio process is not just throwing a bunch of stuff on a page and saying, here it is, here's my work. It should be a process of self-critique, self-examination, self-awareness, to begin to understand how do you want to practice architecture? What are the kinds of firms you want to work for? You have the advantage of having a more robust market than, say, a few years ago. So there's plenty of work out there. You just have to decide where do you want to start your career. And it has to be a decision that is deliberate, that is reasoned, that is thought through, because it is a crucial one. I think the job that you have after you graduate with a graduate degree or a terminal professional degree is the most crucial job you will ever have. Because it basically establishes your thinking as an architect. It's how you begin to be mentored. It's how you start to learn the practice of architecture. Summer internships are great, but they're 3 months, right? So they're, you're in, you're working, you're getting valuable experience, but you're not yet working in that full-time job. So I want to be, make that very clear distinction. I look at the portfolio this way. Imagine you leave it at an airport and somebody picks it up. What does it say about you? What do you want it to say about you? So just because you did the work doesn't mean you show it. Only the best work, period. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Do not show every project. You don't need to. Show the best work only. Even in those yes?
For like, you're saying like show the best work and stuff, like
Yes.
when you're in like our stage as a junior, like in college, like what is a good number to show?
Good
like
number?
Is it okay to show only like 2 projects?
3, minimum of 3. 3 to 5 is a good number when you're in that range. Just to give you an idea, when I was putting together my undergrad portfolio, I had 4 projects. And that was for grad and professional. We were trying to either go to grad school or obtain professional employment. So, it was the 2 projects from my senior year and 1 project from we had a 5-year degree, so basically the last 3 semesters of my work was the only thing, and then I had a land art installation that I'd done on the side. So that was it. So it was not what I did my freshman year in my freshman studio. Again, valuable stuff to learn, but it's important that you only show the best work. So that's where you start to make that editing. Now I know you do have the option here. You have the core studios, you know, the four studio sequence, and then you have option studios. I do recommend taking 2 option studios, not just one, just because it gives you another project. It gives you another chance, because you're putting a lot of pressure on that one project or that one option studio. Because those are the studios where you start to really begin to think and work as an emerging practitioner, especially in the undergrad level. Grad school, it's usually a different animal, I know, just depending on the year you're coming into the program, whether it's 2-year, 3-year, year and a half, however it gets parsed out. If you do a thesis or a capstone, those all get nuanced, but again, only the best work, 3 to 5 projects is usually pretty good. Now again, with the core studios, those, you know, they're very prescriptive, and they need to be, because that's their job. They're there to teach you the basics and get you the language we use as designers. Just because you had to do it in the studio doesn't mean you have to show it. You know, you can curate the portfolio. It is your opportunity to position the work the way you wish to position it. Just because the critics said do this plan doesn't mean you have to show it if it's not necessarily relevant to the idea of the project. And that is one thing I do encourage you all to do, is look at the projects and think, all right, how would you take somebody through this? Would you start at the end, like what you presented at the final review? That may make sense to do it that way. Or do you start at the beginning, or do you start somewhere in the middle? It's important that you sit back, look at the work, and say, okay, how would I want to take somebody through this project? And also, too, again, as you look at that, some things that you may need to do to get plans up to snuff, or drawings or renderings up to snuff. You may need to do a little post-production. You may need to do some work, rebuild a model, rephotograph. Be prepared to do that, but also weigh that in terms of what we would call a return on investment. To borrow a capitalist term, I'm not a capitalist, but it's there, let's use it. So, you know, the amount of time it would take to say, rework this plan or rephotograph this model versus redo this rendering. You've got to weigh that option. Can you make this drawing show what you want it to show in 2 hours versus 8 hours of work? Because we know you guys are doing other studios, you're doing other work, things like that, so you have to weigh that. That is true. So I'm just going to start washing you with images, because it's good to just see work, see portfolios, see how it's presented. Some of these did come out of the portfolio class, and some of these are work that I've done with other students, or have portfolios that I've seen come across my desk at workshop. So, okay. So any questions on that so far before I start launching in? Now, again, I am always of the mind, you know, you don't just throw spreads together and say, I'm going to have 18 spreads for a project. I always look at it this way, you know, as long as necessary, but as short as possible. Really, it's that simple, you know, because if it's always in that when you're standing up to present the project in a review, you know, if you didn't say it in the first 30 seconds, it's probably not crucial, right? So you start to think about it that way. So again, very clean layout, consistent, you know, have a language, figure grounds. If you want to do matrix kind of iterations and drawings like that. And it's not just, you know, filling a page. You have to be strategic. For this portfolio, for example, the seam is right here, right? So this is a big full bleed image with some, you know, what we would call more caption type images to the side. So again, it's not like what I see where you guys just plaster a bunch of drawings, you know, like, because you final review, I get it, printing and plotting is expensive, so you just try to throw as much crap on the page as you can. Don't do that here. Take the time, spend the money, compose it. Because I'm going to be honest with you, 30 seconds reviewing a portfolio is probably going to decide whether or not I'm going to pick up the phone and call you. It's really that simple. Diagrams, kind of clear use of drawing and diagrams to help, you know, limited amount of text, you know, providing basic information, when was the project done, who was the studio critic, was it a team project? If so, if it was a team project, who was your teammate, what did they do, what did you do? Be prepared to offer that information. So in this one, for example, the scene is right here. So he elected to use this. Again, read the photograph. I mean, where could you place that scene in a way that's not going to obstruct the image? Little diagrams like that. Big sections and renderings in relation. So it's not about, you can have big drawings, and you can have full bleeds, but again, they're very strategic. The use of the resume at the end, this is becoming more and more common, and I think it's, again, it's always dealer's choice on that. If you choose to put it in there, but if you do choose to put it in there, make sure it is composed and edited in such a way that it reflects the composition of the portfolio. It's not taking a little 8.5 by 11 resume and just sticking it in the back. Yeah?
How do you feel about slide color for the resume?
Slide color?
Slide color, so a little bit of color.
Color in what sense? Like with images?
Oh, no, in your resume.
Oh! If there's one color, maybe it's all right. You don't want to have a polychromed.
Well, no, I mean like just like if you've got a line going across the page or something.
Yeah. I mean, as long as it, is compositionally, relevant. Yeah. But again, one color is probably all right. You start getting 2, 3, 4, then it gets wild colors. And two, the resume is a visual document. We do look at it. Yes, it's just text, but you're using text visually. I mean, how do you read it as a visual document? Again, the cover page. Use of icons. Now that can be done. It can be overdone, but it depends on how you want to deploy them. The ability to use them to serve as a tell for the project that you're moving on to the next project. And this is not something where you're just putting a bunch of images, right? This is a matrix of the iteration, right? How is this thing made? How is it crafted? So at least there's a deliberate story behind it, right? That can work. But if you're just putting the images on the page, that gets to be challenging. So you see here, I mean, this is the same portfolio, right? But she's using different language because she's letting the project dictate. She's letting the larger portfolio establish the structure and the meta-narrative, but then each project has its own narrative, and let that emerge from the project. This one was, it's a project that only takes, a few spreads, and then she's on to the next one. So it doesn't have to be a lot. Another process as it relates to the artifact. How you use, so this actually is where this, the scene's here on this guy. So, how does this section then start to bleed across the, so that other image you saw was right there. So again, using the poché, letting the plans, the site plans, how do you pull off that information? The diagrams acting as a caption. Yeah?
Do you think it's better to poché walls in a portfolio versus the double lines?
At this scale, yeah, because then it helps it pop graphically. Plans, line work can start to go away depending on how it's been brought into it. And always bring in the vector drawings, things like that. Don't just JPEG or raster. Always try to. Is there a question right there? Okay. So I'm just going to quickly go through these images, but even the use of renderings, letting the frame kind of cut away, this is given a full page. So don't be afraid to let drawings and renderings, and if they're crucial, give them that weight. You always have to think about it this way: where does your eye want to go? What image do you want to privilege on the page and why? Again, the use of the matrix is kind of as a in the resume, so it starts to fit within the composition of the portfolio. Another one, again, starting to establish a graphic language. So he's going to be working through this way, then these circles come back. You start to know when you're at a project or a different project. How are you rendering sections? How are you rendering plans? So he's starting to establish an identity, a design identity. Right? You can offer critiques of the visuals as you will, but at least there's an establishment of who we think you could be as a designer, and how he's thinking compositionally, how he's thinking representationally. Again, simple colors, cover, right? W2 Zooty with fonts and graphics. But this is where, again, a very simple layout. Now the table of contents can be used to just, yes, it's the title of the project, but this can also be used to offer other information. When was it done? Who is the critic? Was it a team project? Is there a 1 or 2 line kind of abstract about the project? So the table of contents just carries more weight than just the table of contents. Right? So again, this is a similar one where the scene would be on that side. So when you start to see how the pages come together. And typically what I like to do, and this is what we do when we're putting together projects for the office, or making sure that you're, lay everything out. Give yourself a big wall at home or in your apartment or dorm, wherever you may be. Put it on the wall, move things around. Maybe this project makes more sense over here. Maybe, how many spreads? Does it start to have a flow? Does it start to have a theme? Does it start to have a language? Make notes to yourself in that. How are diagrams working? Right? Yeah, very simple, and these can be, you're just taking existing drawings and just providing another layer of information to them. So you're not you're not redoing a whole lot of work, but you are providing another layer of information for the project. How do things like section marks get rendered? Get called out that we know that that's a section. So he's adopted for this project to use orange as kind of a color that either talks about paths or talks about, back to these diagrams, how the building opens up, closes in. So here the orange becomes that marker of here's the section cut, so it becomes an annotative strategy. So here it becomes actually the poche of the section cut. So again, the seam is right here. So that's a big full drawing. That's a section drawing. The module is important. Whether you do landscape or portrait, both of them have their advantages. His actually was a landscape, because of this very drawing. This drawing started to establish the size of the portfolio, because he's like, I want to do this section very big. Well, it's a landscape condition, so that's what dictated the orientation of the portfolio, and it just happened to work with the other projects. Group work is always important. This was a competition that he had done in the studio, so make sure you're citing your teammates. Give them credit for the work they did, and likewise, they should give you credit for the work you do. If you did the models, say that. If they did the renderings, say that. Things like this, where the text, again, it's always personal. I feel that starts to get a little fussy sometimes, and two, if that can get lost if it's not done well. That's about at the threshold of starting to get a little too, you don't know who's going to be reading these. So this is another one. So how is the text? This is acting again as a caption to this larger, full image. The use of text, is it block? Does it have the edge? I prefer block because again it starts to operate more visually that way. But again, that's my personal preference. How does a model a generative model and maybe a site plan work together, or a series of diagrams about scale or aggregate as they relate to models. Have a very simple layout. Should be clear, should be direct. So you see she's set up a language here, right, where you've got your intro image and text. You know, for the next one, another kind of intro image. You know, and then drawings like this, you know, which we know start to get layered. You know, so here, this is her seam, so there's a nice relationship between, say, these diagrams and then the complexity of this kind of drawing. So there's a bit of relief here to this, giving it enough weight on the page. You know, and then this is a section rendering. Plans are always a little bit of a challenge because of just a lot of times the scale, especially when you're dealing with something like an 8.5 by 11 or even sometimes smaller. You know, how much information can actually be in this kind of plan. So legends are always helpful, you know, but also too letting furniture, like say if this is a house, for example, you know the furniture can give you that tell, so you don't need to call it a bedroom. But you know, sometimes you have, like, if you're dealing with, say, office plans, if it's a high-rise project or something like that, the legend. Yeah.
Do you have hardly any plans?
Pardon?
Hardly any plans.
Well, see, this is, you know, and again, for me, I think you need to look at the project and say, okay, what is the best media to represent the project? Just like, what is the best method to work through the design process? So, is it a plan problem? Is it a plan, or is it a plan concept? You know, that should help you start to understand which kinds of drawings potentially could be in that project for the portfolio. And when you find yourself in the option studios, a lot of times they're not telling you draw a section, draw a plan. They're wanting you to start to figure out, okay, this is a sectional problem. I need to work in section. Okay, what kind of section? Is it a section model? Is it a sliver model? Is it a perspective section? Is it an axon section? Is it a structure? You know, what's the best method to start working through those design questions? And I always, whenever I teach a comprehensive studio, I always like, you know, find the part of the building that's going to give you the most problems. That's where you're going to have the most solutions. And, you know, you got to find the most complicated part of the building usually to help you resolve that. So this again is using like a generative, whether it was a model or a casting or some type of section model, then to the finished rendering. So she's kind of working on both sides, right? Saying final product, but then maybe also generative stuff at the beginning. Again, the big section. Depending on the section, you know, she's elected to not show any of the surrounding context in the sense of you know, the larger street edge, that's fine, or stuff behind, because she needed space for this. Again, it's always, where do you want us to focus? Where do you want our eye to go? What do you want to tell us? She's talking about this space, right? That's where she wants us to go, so the rest of the stuff is not in the drawing because it's not important to the drawing. So you have to have a bit of that curatorial eye. And don't be afraid to edit. You can over-edit. Sometimes it's a good exercise to, you know, over-edit. Then you can start to figure out where the holes are to put back the most relevant information. Again, you have that big wall of your projects. So this was some of her professional work. This is another one. Again, this is where the resume is at the front. Contents. Again, you know, how are you treating the large image? You know, so this becomes background, but then it also has content, you know, that he wants us to go to. He wants to direct us to. Simple text gives us the information. here actually the text doing that isn't as bad because he has this as the frame, right? So it helps it visually. How diagrams and renderings work together. So it's multiple layers of information. The scale of this information as diagram, and then more evocative images about the experience. Right? So the two can work on the same page. It's just how do you set them in relation to one another. Just because you put them next to one another doesn't mean they're going to talk to one another. A juxtaposition does not a relationship make, so you have to be able to draw that out and curate that. So to the rendering as it then relates to a model shot, as it then relates to a detailed kind of drawing. Now, when you get further on in studios and you're dealing more with those kind of drawings, like from a comprehensive standpoint or a construction tectonic standpoint, this actually works quite well because it's talking about the relationship of this edge and these tensile members, how they hit the ground. So that provides a layer of information that works at that scale. We're not getting into the weeds of what all of this stuff is, but we know he's been working through how that could be resolved. And then the elevations here below, now they're operating more graphically than they are architecturally because we don't have the ground, we don't have the context beyond. They're operating more as figures. Right? We want to focus on what's being rendered here versus them as elevations, like in sight, in situ. But he's also given us this insight, right? So he's working back and forth. Sections rendered similarly to the elevations, except we do have this ground line, which helps us set it. But again, he's letting this talk about the context, potential sighting, and then the project. Again, I see this, I know I'm in a new project. Where's my tell? So these are just a few examples, and I think it is important that you compare each other's portfolios, you look at each other's work, you offer each other advice, you offer each other critique, because again, you're this close to the work, and you may think that image is saying what you think it's saying. Someone else may read it and say, no, it's not, and you want to make sure you know that. Now, the portfolio should live both digitally and physically. It's nice to have an artifact. The advantage of the digital is that it's more cost-effective, typically. But then the portfolio you do have as an object, something you take to the interview, have it printed on portfolio, weight paper that gives it some substance, some gravitas, that respects the work that's on the page. Don't show up with just 8.5 by 11 copy paper. Right? Your work deserves better than that. So pay the extra money. Get it bound properly. And binding is another thing. You need to be strategic about that. Is it a comb? Is it a spiral? Is it perfect bound? Is it, which is more like book. And that's those price points are coming down more and more every day. So don't be afraid to do that and explore those options. So, have a hard copy that you want to take to the interview. Also, think about a leave behind. Not so much the whole portfolio, because that's in terms of cost, but can you leave them with a 1-page or a 2-page or something, a postcard, something that can maybe that's where you select the best project. Maybe if you're doing a thesis, it's that project that's the focus of that. But it's something that kind of gives them a something to remember that you have a visual recall to them as they're deliberating, Yeah.
Do you not recommend leaving your entire portfolio behind?
You can. I mean, it's just a matter of if you have enough
Yeah.
printed. Again, that's on you in terms of how much you want to expend on that front. But again, we all know money, like space, is finite. So, depending, how much of that you want to expend or how precious the object is. Because you can go into this process of just, hand binding, it can be very laborious. I mean, not to say that I've seen those portfolios and made those portfolios, and they can be very beautiful, but you don't want to just leave, because they're a lot of work, they're a lot of effort. And so if you want to treat the portfolio that way, that's something you take with you, but then that's the leave behind is something that can help on that. I mean, even if it's just a smaller type book or something that doesn't have everything in it, but it's what we would call an experience sample. Question.
What are your thoughts on including like some non-studio projects? Like I have a class right now making just like tons of like small models exploring like a different thing every week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there was a portfolio, she had that. Now, it depends on the class, and so this is more kind of a workshop kind of class seminar. Is that
Yeah.
kind of where I'm headed here? And I think that can be done. I think so long as it's given the same weight and attitude as a studio project, so it doesn't feel like it's something that's an appendix or a supplemental.
Okay.
So let me get to hers, because there was one she had on here. Because it's a good question, but this was the project, right? So this was for a more of a seminar, right? So it was dealing with acoustics and sound, right? So she's treating graphically the language and the work that she'd done. She had to do a bit of post-production to kind of bring it to the level of the studio work. But it's not done in that many spreads, but it has a similar kind of architectonic attitude that resonates with the studio work. Does that make sense? So as long as there's a coherence to it, it's only 3 spreads. So it doesn't have to be much, but as long as it's given that graphic weight. 2, is it more of a visual class, like a making class or a materials class, that you do that. I could see that, but if it's more research-based, like some of the energy classes, things like that can be a little harder to put in a portfolio. If you have done something like an energy model or some exercise like that, have it as part of a project for like bound as something to share at the interview. If you ask about it, then that way you have it there as material to speak to. That's a good way to handle it. That's a good question, because some of that stuff gets, and you have to be judicious in that too. Because we've all had those studios that just didn't go very well. There are projects that I have done that no one will ever see. Literally, you can't see them because I burned them, so they're gone. So we don't talk about them anymore.
I'm not sure if I asked this, how do you show a design build studio?
Design build. Now that is similar to some of these model iterations that she had done, like when we think about these material studies, for example. So work like this. So this is where you could start to treat it as, how do you show the process of kind of design as it then gets to material? You could adopt a similar strategy as this, where you're seeing in a moment. But then again, at Design Build Studio, typically that's a big group of you that have been putting this work together. That's, again, citing the group. What did you do in that project? The project we had at the end, the portfolio showed at the end, he had done that. It was kind of a combination design build and something from another class. So, get to it. Any other questions as I get to that? Because a design build can be a challenge. Just by the very nature of the work.
How do you cite people? Like, do you just put like group member like Isabella Finney did this and group member?
Well, that's something you could you could do it in a number of ways. Table of contents, right? So like say you take that title project and you say group work, and here were the group members. Okay, so that's where the group has been identified. And then say you have a rendering like this. And say you did this rendering, rendering done by, you put your name. Or, rendering by author, because you're the author of the portfolio. But say there was this, thing that was done by your group mate, modeled by X. So then that way there's at least, some credit given there. And that's a way to handle it, that you're at least being honest to the work. Because, if we see this portfolio and we think you can do this rendering and you didn't do it, that can be a problem for you when you get the job, and I expect you to do that. Right? I didn't do that rendering, I did that. Well, okay, we're not building it physically, so we need it done that way. So how do we work this out? Yeah.
With the thing with group projects, I just hate to bring it up, but you have that member that
Didn't do anything?
Yeah. Do you credit them in the table of contents?
Yeah.
And then leave it the
That
rest?
well.
Do you pretend they weren't there?
That's just the nature of the beast. They were a part of the group, and we all know that happens. So, yeah, you list them because they were a part of the group, and the challenge is, it hurts because they didn't do anything. And I got to tell you, as a professor, it's hard because you see it. I mean, we're not stupid. We do see people not pulling their weight. And that happens in, in the office too sometimes. Less so because everyone's there, and there's implications if you don't do your work in the office.
Okay. Credit them and just
Credit them
suck
in
it
the
up.
credit, but then again, if you're not, if they didn't do anything, they don't have anything to credit in terms of artifacts in the work, right? So then it's.
Okay. That answers my question.
Yeah, and that's a fair one, because it is frustrating.
Another question too.
Yeah.
Graphically, do things where edges don't line up and spacing is inconsistent, is that?
Well, something like this. These two are acting as captions, so these two at least make a frame. That's okay. It's where you start seeing subtle things. It's like that. That doesn't look. This looks deliberate, and it is deliberate, versus the slight. That looks like you just were sloppy. So I've seen a lot of those portfolios where things don't. Like if you were to have a big bunch of images, like say these, and these didn't line up, you can tell, it's just, you got to have that level of rigor. And if you don't have it in your own work, you're probably not going to have it in the office, and that's a tell. You want to make sure things are done. Again, it's your work, it's out there, so always show the best. Yeah.
Do you think that it's okay to put installations
Yeah.
in your work?
Yeah, this was mock-up installation. Yeah. Again, it's how do you show it, similar to the design build question, right? It's how do you show it in a way that demonstrates the breadth of the idea, the generating process, the fabrication, the tectonics, and the after effect. If it was an installation and the opening night reception, it's nice to see those images too. How was it received in the public? Was there any publicity? Things like that. Put that in, depending on how you want to promote that. Yeah.
Is it good to put the projects in chronological order?
Great question. The overall structure of the portfolio, I am always start strong, end strong. Now, a strong project that you want to start with, that may have been your last project. Okay? But then the project you want to end with may have been your first project. So you can construct the order of the portfolio however you wish. Chronology is it's an easy one because it does work. But you're then beholden to A, B, C, D, E. And again, ideally every project is strong, so that chronology shouldn't matter. It's just more of if you feel more comfortable, if it's one less thing for you to kind of think through as a designer, then it's fine to do that. Or do you want to structure it more like as a theme, theme type portfolio? Chronology is, it doesn't really. When I look at a portfolio, I don't necessarily follow that. I mean, some do. as in terms of a line of thought, because two, chronology can really help you if you're thinking, okay, I want to show my evolution. And that's, if you use it to your advantage, it can do that quite well as an evolution thinking. Good question. Okay. Yeah.
For like labeling projects, do you think that we should, like, if we're showing like our 320 art like phone book installation, should we take out like the 320 and just do phone book installation as like the title of the project? Or
Well,
do
but are
think
you
we
showing it
should
as part of
put-
the studio, or are you showing it as, because it was done as part of the studio. I mean, it could be a separate project,
Yeah,
it's just done in the same semester, that's fine.
okay,
You would still have it as a 320 project, it's just, because there are like the 410 sequence, right? You
Yeah.
have there's the market project and the res hall project, right?
yeah,
A lot of times those are done as two separate projects because they are. Right?
yeah,
It's just done in the same semester. So similarly with the installations, you could treat it that way. Or you could bundle it together, again, that's always
Yeah.
up to what's the best way to show the work. Yeah, good question. Okay, any other? And I want to make sure I'm covering, again, with interview day next Friday, the leave behind, typically, you're probably better served to show, one project, because I think didn't they put the stipulation that it's a one-page leave behind or something like that?
yeah, I think so.
So, maybe one project is the focus of that. Again, the best project, because then you can go into a bit more depth with some images and things like that.
All right, well,
Yeah.
With the leave behind, do you suggest that like it should be kind of like an 8.5 by 11, or more like your portfolio page size? Or
Well, if it's more postcard or if it's something that kind of folds out, you want to have it be a designed object and a deliberate object. I think if you just leave an 8.5 by 11, as long, like say you have your resume as an 8.5 by 11 and the leave behind is an 8.5 by 11 and the leave behind, they're both portrait, for example, then maybe there's a consistency there that they can work as a document that way. That would make some sense. Or the resume is an 8.5 by 11 and then the leave behind would be more postcard or set of postcards. That can also work well too. A lot of times when we do project interviews, there's like a placemat or table tent, things like that, that would have information on project. You can get gimmicky really quick, so you want to avoid it. You don't want to be gimmicky. You want to be smart and deliberate in what you leave behind. Right? And again, it should be printed on something that's a bit more substantive than copy paper, right? I mean, don't, same with the resume. Yeah.
Do you think it's okay on interview day to bring like a sample portfolio instead of a full portfolio?
Yeah, yeah. Because again, it's in process, we know that. The great thing is that you do have interview day to start that process, but we as the employers, we know you're still working through it, right? So if there's a level of completeness, even to the in process, we can see that. Or even if you have one project that's fully complete in the portfolio and the rest of it's still working, you at least have that as a document that shows a level of completeness for that one project, for example. If that helps out, because then you're not worried about the whole thing, right? I mean, because it can be a lot to take in.
all right. Well, thank you so much, Ash, for coming in.
Sure.